Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I know how valuable your planning time is, so I appreciate you spending a few minutes learning together. Today we're gonna focus and talk on backward design, a planning framework developed by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe that help us create lessons with a clear purpose and strong alignment. As teachers, we've all explained planning a fun lesson only to realize afterward that it didn't fully address the learning objective. Backward design helps prevent that by encouraging us to begin with the end in mind. Our goal today isn't to add more to your plate. Instead, I hope you'll see how this process can actually make planning easier, save time, and help students achieve the intended learning outcomes. By the end of today's sessions, you'll have a planning process you can immediately apply during PLCs, lesson plannings, and even daily instructions. Let's begin looking at our learning targets. By the end of today's sessions, you will be able to explain 3 stages of backward design, analyze and unpack the TICs, create an assessment aligned to the standard, plan learning experiences that intentionally prepare students for success. But before we dive in, I like to reflect on your own planning process. Turn to your table partner and discuss. You're gonna take 2 minutes. While you're discussing with your partner, I want you to think about when you begin planning a lesson, where do you usually start? Do you start with a curriculum, the TICs, the assessments, or maybe a fun activity you found online? Take about 30 to 45 seconds to share. I heard several different answers, and that's completely normal. We all have different planning habits. The beauty of backward planning is that it gives every teacher a consistent roadmap that keeps instruction aligned from beginning to end. But you might ask yourself, what is backward design? Backward design is built around one simple question. What do I want students to know and be able to do when the lesson is over? Instead of beginning with activities, we begin with the learning goal. Think about planning a vacation. You don't decide which highway to take before choosing your destination. First, you decide where you're going. Next, you determine how you'll get there. And finally, you'll choose the stops you'll make along the way. Teaching works exactly the same. The destination is our TICs. The evidence is our assessment. And the journey is our instruction. When those 3 pieces are aligned, students' learning become much more intentional. But why are we going to use backward design? One reason is alignment. We've all found engaging lessons on Pinterest, Teacher by Teachers, or social media that looked amazing. There's nothing wrong with those resources. The question we should ask is, does this activity help students master the TICs? If the answer is yes, great. If not, it may not belong in that lesson. Backward design reminds us that engagement is important, but engagement without purpose doesn't always lead to learning. It helps us make instructional decisions based on students' outcomes rather than interesting activities. Stage 1 asks us to identify our desired result. This begins with the TICs. The standard tells us exactly what students should know and be able to do. The standard tells us exactly what students should, yes. For example, if students are expected to solve addition and subtraction problems within 20, using efficient strategies and explain their thinking, then those become our learning goals. Notice what we're not doing. We're not choosing centers first. We're not choosing worksheets, and we're not deciding on crafts or games. Everything starts with that standard. The TICs drive every instructional decision we make. So, unpacking the TICs. Simply reading the TICs isn't enough. We need to unpack it. Ask yourself, what is the big idea? What knowledge do students need? What skills should they demonstrate? What vocabulary is essential? And what misconception might student have? Just taking 5 minutes to unpack the ticks often save much more planning time later. Does it give us clarity my God, about exactly what we're teaching? So now it's your turn. Table discussion. At your tables, discuss what misconceptions might student have with these ticks. Think about what you observe in your classroom. What mistakes do students consistently make? How could anticipating those misconceptions help you adjust your instruction before they occur? Take about 1 minute. I heard one of the groups said that their discussion reminds us that knowing our learners is just as important as knowing our standards. Ugh, this is not going good. Stage 2. Determine acceptable evidence. Oops. Okay. So once we know what students should learn, we ask our next question. How will I know they've learned it? This is our assessment. This is where our assessment comes in. Assessment doesn't have to mean a unit test. It might be an exit ticket, a teacher observation, a student discussion, a performance test, or a conference. The important thing is that our assessment directly measures the learning target from the ticks. So now we're going to analyze the assessment. Let's examine this assessment together. Notice students aren't just solving problems. They're explaining their thinking. That explanation provides evidence of conceptual understanding, not just memorization. Turn to your table and ask yourself, does this assessment truly measure the ticks? Will you revise anything? As you talk with your table, consider, does this task require your students to apply that exact skill naming the ticks? Could a student pass this task without truly understanding the standards? And what will you add or change to strengthen the alignment? Finally, we arrive to the instruction. This is where many teachers naturally begin, but notice it's always the last step in backward design planning. Because we've already identified the learning goal and created our assessment, choosing activities becomes much easier. Every instructional activity should prepare students to successfully complete the assessment. Your mini lesson introduces new learning, guided practices provide support, centers allow meaningful practice, and small group addresses any misconceptions students may have. Independent practice builds confidence. The exit ticket tells you whether students are ready to move forward or need additional support. Every activity has a clear instructional purpose. So in your sample lesson, you should have your objective. Students will solve addition within 20 using multiple strategies. You will have a mini lesson, teacher models using 10 frames. You'll have a guided practice, students solve problems with partners. You can have different type of centers like number line station, dice addition, fact fluency games, and teacher table. And as a closure, they will fill out their exit ticket. So, bringing it all together, how does everything connect? This graphic shows the complete planning cycle. Everything begins with the ticks. The ticks determine our desired result. Those desired results determine our assessment, and the assessment guides instruction. When these pieces are aligned, students experience purposeful learning rather than disconnected activities. One of the biggest mindset shift with backward design is remembering that activities should support learning, not replace it. When we begin with the end in mind, every instructional decision becomes more intentional. So some common planning mistakes don't start with cute activities, worksheets, or Pinterest ideas. Instead, start with standards, learning goals, assessments, and instruction. So now it's your opportunity to apply to this learning. Each table will receive a different ticks. As a team, you'll identify the desired learning results. You're going to decide what evidence would show mastery. You're going to brainstorm one or two instructional activities that would prepare students for success. And remember, don't start with the activity. Start with the learning goal. You will have about 2 minutes, and then we'll hear from your group, from one group. So as we wrap up, I would like you to reflect on today's learning. Think about these questions. What's one idea you'll take back to your classroom? Which stage of backward design do you think will have the biggest impact on your learning? For me, the greatest takeaway is remembering to begin with the end in mind. When we know exactly what success looks like, planning becomes more focused, instructions become more intentional, and students have a greater opportunity to achieve mastery. Thank you for your participation today. As we come to the end of our time together, I want us to take a moment to reflect again on how backward design can impact our daily planning. Throughout this session, we talk about how effective lesson planning begins with the end in mind. The first step is identifying when we want students to learn by looking closely at the ticks and determining the desired result. The second step is deciding what evidence will show that students have mastered the learning goals that helps us create assessments that truly measure understanding. And the third step is planning meaningful learning experiences that prepare students for success. But now I want you to think about one more question. What is one change you can make to your lesson planning process after today? Maybe it's spending more time unpacking the ticks. Maybe it's creating your assessment before choosing an activity. Maybe it's making sure every activity has a clear purpose connected to the learning goal. Remember, backward design is not about adding another step to our workload. It's about taking the steps we already take more intentional. When we plan with the end in mind, our instruction becomes more focused. Students understand what they're learning and why they're learning it, and we're better able to provide the support each student needs. Thank you for your participation today and for the work you do every day to create meaningful learning experience for students. I encourage you to take this framework into your next planning session and begin asking, what do I want my students to know and be able to do? And how will I know they got there? Thank you. And those are my references I use. And before you leave, write down one action step you'll take during your next planning meeting to use backward design.